chapter 11, part 3. In 1896, Sarah Bernhardt was given a day of glorification. Friends and admirers had long wondered why she had never received the Legion d'Honneur. The French government would doubtless have been willing to recognize the great artist, but may have thought twice before presenting the coveted red ribbon to a woman of such eccentric reputation. There were many who felt that some form of public homage was long past due her. After all, Sarah Bernhardt was the theater, and the theater was Paris. She was the official personage of Parisian life. She holds in Paris not only the absolutely first place, but a place apart, comparable to none, declared Jules Lemaitre. He and a group of other writers, which included Sardou, Coppée, Rostand, Catulle-Mendès, and others, organized a day of tribute they heralded as La Journée Sarah Bernhardt. The celebration began at 12 noon on December 10th with a banquet in the large Salle du Zodiac of the Grand Hotel. Here, 500 guests were gathered, each having paid 40 francs, a modest sum when one learns that this included the meal, a theater seat for the ensuing matinee, a commemorative medal, and a copy of the Golden Book of the Gala. In spite of the early hour, the women wore evening gowns, and the men dress attire. The queen of the occasion arrived a half hour after they were assembled. She appeared on an overhanging balcony wearing a dazzling white dress embroidered in gold and trimmed with sable. At sight of her, the 500 guests rose in a body. As she came down the winding stairs, someone has reported. Her long train followed her like a graceful tame serpent. At every turn she bent over the railing and twined her arms like an ivy wreath round the velvet pillars while she acknowledged the acclamations with her disengaged hand. Her lithe and slender body scarcely seemed to touch the earth. She was wafted toward us in a halo of glory. At a table on the raised dais, she sat between the Minister of Fine Arts and a personal representative sent by the President of France. A short welcoming toast was proposed by Sardou, "To the great and good Sarah," after which the orchestra and choir of the Concerts Cologne struck up an ode to her glory, especially composed by Armand Silvestre and Gabriel Piernet, when everyone turned their attention to the serious business of eating. The menu consisted of, oh boy, it's all French. Okay. Huîtres de Ostende, beurre, anchois, radis, saucissons hors d'oeuvres, then relevé, truites, salmones, froides, sauce verte, entrées, côtelettes de présalé aux pommes frites, Poulardes d'humans à la Sardou. This is for you, Kathleen. Spoon aux Georges Goulet. And rôtis is faisans flanqués de perdreaux truffés. Pâté de foie gras Grand Hotel. Salade à la Parisienne. Then entremets, gâteau Sarah. Then glacé is bombe tosca. Desserts, compotes de fruits, patisseries, vins, sherry golden, Chablis Monton, Saint Estèphe and Carafes, Chambertin 1884, and Café Liqueurs. I have reprinted the menu only to marvel after such a midday snack anyone was able to carry on with the subsequent celebrations of the day. But apparently, the guest of honor, who always had the appetite of a bird and only toyed with her food, arose fresh as a girl to make her departure, and, as she went slowly up the winding stair, from time to time sending a smile or a wave of her hand to her admirers below, she seemed almost to be mounting in triumph to the sky. There was indeed a Roman triumph quality to this day. 100 carriages in procession formation transported the celebrants from the Grand Hotel to the Renaissance. The streets were lined with onlookers, and a special police had to be stationed to hold back the crowds outside the theater. At the matinee, the star performed the third act of Phaedra and the fourth of René Vaincu. Then was staged the apotheosis of Sarah Bernhardt. The curtain rose to reveal her seated under a golden canopy on a flower-strewn throne. Below her were grouped young actresses in classic robes wearing fillets of roses. Then one by one the leading contemporary poets came on stage to read the verses he had composed for the occasion. Coppée, Mendès, Harcourt, Heredia, and finally Rostand, whose sonnet was considered particularly fine. The first 4 lines were at least worth quoting. En que temps sans beauté, sois encore tenu restes, sachant descendre, palais un grand escalier clair. Siendre un bandeau, partour en lice, brandir en fer. Reine de latitude et princesse de gestes! Exclamation. What's that? At the finish, Sarah, pale and looking as though she were about to expire, stood dissolved in tears while from the overhead fly loft showers of camellias rained down. She was not the only one to weep. Her dressing room was jammed with serviteurs, who paid their own lachrymose tribute. Maurice Bernhardt, most prominent of the weepers, kept repeating between sobs, "Nobody knows my mother. She's a good, gallant woman." At one point, Jules Renard, who had managed to get control of himself, echoed Maurice's a gallant woman, and they all cried some more. Wires from all over the world poured in. One from D'Annunzio read, "On this day of supreme glory, a grateful Italy sends its laurels to the unforgettable enchantress." Ave. Maurice's reiterated protestations of filial devotion may have sprung from mixed emotions, one of which might have been a sense of guilt. 2 years earlier, the Dreyfus case had exploded with all its ugly repercussions. The story of those tense days is common knowledge. It was a tragic time when a great country was divided into 2 warring camps. Those blindly loyal to the glorious army of France, even when it had made a heinous blunder, and those who had the courage to come out for justice and believed that French honor was at stake, when an innocent man was made to suffer for a crime he had not committed, when friendships were shattered and families suffered rifts from which were not mended until the First World War. A rift caused over l'affaire in her own family brought Madame Sarah much anguish. All her life she had hated any form of tyranny or injustice, and from the start of the famous trial she had been convinced of the complete innocence of Dreyfus. She had followed the reports daily in the papers and had gone to witness the unhappy captain's public degradation. After the ghastly sentence to Devil's Island, she had campaigned for his vindication. To come out openly as a Dreyfusard took tremendous courage at that time. She went to see Émile Zola, and it is said that it was she who persuaded him to write his fulminating outcry for justice j'accuse. Next day, a paper came out with the headline, "Sarah Bernhardt has joined the Jews against the army." Capital J for Jews, capital A for Army. Her coterie of friends were divided into warring factions. To her great distress, Francois Coppet and Jules Lemaitre were in the other camp, both belonging to an idiotically prejudiced organization called La Ligue de la Patrie Française, which, according to the Oxford Companion to French Literature, typified all that was bigoted, anti Semitic, and reactionary in public life. This is so crazy. But Victorien Sardou protested along with her the innocence of Dreyfus, and of course the fiery Octave Mirbeau was vociferous in his demands for justice. She stuck to her stand even when it came to the open rupture with her nearest and dearest. Maurice Bernhardt was an outspoken anti-Semite and a violent anti-Dreyfusard, as were most members of the Parisian smart set. Mother and son quarreled bitterly, so much so that Maurice moved with his wife and daughter Simone to live in the south of France for well over a year, during which time there was no communication between them. It is difficult to realize the tensions of those times. Even after Dreyfus had been exonerated and reinstated in the army, feelings rose and continued to run high, and nervous hostesses breathed sighs of relief when a meal terminated without any guest blundering into the subject. Liziane tells of a luncheon at the Boulevard Perriere when she was a small child a few years after the turn of the century. One of the guests casually mentioned the name of an important department store owner whose name happened to be Dreyfus, no relation to Alfred. Edward Geoffrey, a corpulent elderly beau who danced daily attendance upon Madame Sarah and was insanely jealous of all her other courtiers, muttered something about the misfortune of having the same name as that of the traitor. Georges Clarin, Sarah's old faithful, who had stuck by her undaunted pro-Dreyfus stand, barked at Geoffrey to shut up. Maurice shouted at Clarin to keep a civil tongue in his head. Sarah shrieked at her son to be quiet, and the other guests began arguing at once, and the whole tempest started up again. In his vehemence, Geoffrey shot a plateful of salad onto Louise Abema's lap. The little girls, Simone and Liziane, went into fits of giggles. Maurice made such a sneering comment about the treachery of all Dreyfusards that his mother reacted by smashing a plate. Maurice rose and left the room, taking with him his gentle wife, who burst into tears. Sarah then smashed another plate on Geoffrey's shoulder. The butler and footman fled for cover in the pantry, and the luncheon broke up. Liziane, who was some years younger than her sister, sat in her high chair, serenely drinking up the wine with which her grandmother, in her agitation, had mistakenly replenished her silver mug. In 1899, Bernhardt again put on young men's costume and did Hamlet. The verb is used advisedly, for what she did was to interpret the title role in a manner that was very direct, very natural, and very, very feminine. The translation was the joint work of Marcel Schwob and Eugene Morand, and they followed the original version with pedantic exactitude. In Paris, it was considered a success, although openings regarding Bernhardt's own performance were varied and heated. Many found it superb. Others couldn't bear it. Catulle Mendez, who admired it greatly, went so far as to fight a duel with a dissenting journalist friend, the actual bone of contention being over the momentous question of the color of Hamlet's hair. Maurice Baring found it excellent and claimed that this was the first time the role had been correctly interpreted. When this production was taken across the channel, the public were receptive, although not all the press was over-polite. Punch said that the one thing needed to make it a perfect Hamlet was the appearance of Henry Irving as Ophelia. While Max Beerbohm, who headed his review, Hamlet, Princess of Denmark, wondered if next to Madame Bernhardt would play Othello to Monet Soleil's Desdemona. Max, who professed to be a lover of Sarah's incomparable art, found her quite unbelievable as a man. The one good quality he granted her in the role was the poise and dignity of a person of consequence and unmistakable thoroughbred. Yes, the only compliment one can conscientiously pay her is that her Hamlet was, from first to last, très grande dame. The French translation added to his discomfort, and when rest, perturbed spirit came out as pas, on me trouble, he found it rather like Lulu, I love you, and had an almost overwhelming desire to laugh. The serious dedication of the Adelphi audience struck him as being equally ludicrous. No one dared so much as smile. A smile, he said, would have gone into a laugh, and one laugh in that dangerous atmosphere, and the whole structure of the polite solemnity would have toppled down, bearing beneath its ruins the national reputation for good manners. I, therefore, like everybody else, kept an iron control upon the corners of my lips. It was not until I was halfway home and well out of earshot of the Adelphi that I unsealed the accumulation of my merriment. Word of this unorthodox Hamlet received a worldwide press. The New York Herald reported, Madame Sarah's interpretation of the melancholy Dane has caused 2 French journalists to fight a duel over it and made our Julia Arthur ambitious to play it too. Which one of these effects is more serious remains to be seen. Which one of these effects is the more serious remains to be seen.